My son sold my car while I was in the hospital, but what he found in the trunk made him call me in panic. The phone call, the first thing I remember after waking from heart surgery, was the steady rhythm of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the hospital room. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of the heart monitor was strangely comforting, reminding me that despite everything, I was still alive. The nurse noticed my eyes opening and smiled gently. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "Your surgery went well." My throat felt dry and speaking was difficult. "How long?" I whispered. "You've been asleep for nearly 12 hours," she replied. "Your son stayed for a while, but he had to leave early this morning." My son, Daniel, the thought of him brought both warmth and unease. Daniel had always been complicated, charming when he wanted something, distant when he didn't. Still, he was my only child. I nodded weakly and closed my eyes again, letting exhaustion pull me back into a shallow sleep. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Daniel picked me up in his car, a sleek black SUV that probably cost more than my entire house had 20 years ago. He barely looked at me as he helped me into the passenger seat. "You okay, Dad?" he asked casually. "I'm alive," I said with a faint smile. "That's good," he replied, already focused on his phone. The ride home felt longer than usual. Daniel spent most of the time talking about money problems, credit cards, loans, bad investments. I listened quietly, watching the familiar streets pass by the window. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed, like he had planned it. When we finally reached my house, I noticed something immediately. The driveway looked empty, too empty. My old car was gone. A dull gray 1998 Buick Roadmaster, scratched and rusty from years of use, had sat in that driveway for almost 2 decades. Now there was nothing, just a faint oil stain where it used to be. I turned to Daniel. "Where's my car?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, that thing," he said. My stomach tightened. "Yes. That thing?" Daniel shrugged casually as if the matter were completely unimportant. "I sold it." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "You what?" "I sold it, Dad," he repeated. "Relax." It was basically scrap metal. My chest tightened, though thankfully not in the dangerous way it had before surgery. "You had no right," I said quietly. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Come on. You were in surgery, and honestly, that car was useless." He leaned back against the seat, completely comfortable. "I needed the money." The words felt like a punch to the chest. "How much?" I asked slowly. $2,000. 2,000. My car might have been old, but it was worth more than that. But the money didn't matter. What mattered was that he had sold something that wasn't his, without asking, without telling me. Inside the house, Daniel made himself comfortable in the kitchen while I slowly lowered myself into my chair in the living room. Everything felt strange, too quiet, too different. "Anyway," Daniel said from the kitchen, "the guy who bought it was thrilled, said he collects old cars." I didn't answer, my mind was somewhere else, thinking, remembering. That car had been with me for years, through my wife's illness, through lonely nights after she passed, through every memory of Daniel growing up, and something else. Something Daniel didn't know about, something hidden, safely tucked away where no one would ever think to look, in the trunk, under the spare tire, inside a locked metal box. I suddenly sat up straighter. "Daniel," I said. He looked over from the refrigerator. "What? Did the buyer check the trunk?" Daniel snorted. "It's an old Buick, Dad." He barely checked the engine. My heart began to beat faster. The metal box, it had been there for years, locked, untouched, hidden beneath the spare tire and covered with old tools. Daniel noticed my expression. "Why?" he asked suspiciously. I forced myself to stay calm. "No reason," I said, but inside my mind a storm was forming, because inside that metal box were documents. Old ones, important ones, documents that proved something unbelievable, something worth far more than Daniel could ever imagine. The next morning my phone rang. It was 7:12 a.m. Too early for normal calls, I picked it up slowly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was Daniel's, but it didn't sound like the confident, careless son I knew. His voice was shaking. "Dad, yes." There was a long silence, then he spoke again. "Did you leave something in the trunk of the Buick?" My heart skipped a beat. "What did you find?" I asked calmly. Another silence. Then he whispered, "A metal box." I closed my eyes. "So he found it." Daniel's breathing grew faster. "The guy who bought the car called me this morning," he said. "He opened the trunk, lifted the spare tire, and found the box." "Did he open it?" "Yes." My fingers tightened around the phone. "And inside," Daniel continued, his voice trembling, "there were documents." I didn't say anything because I already knew which documents. Daniel spoke again. "Dad, what is Redwood Valley land deed?" My heart pounded. He kept talking. "It says you own 200 acres of land outside the valley." I took a slow breath. "Yes." Daniel's voice cracked. "But Dad," I looked it up. Another pause. "Do you know how much that land is worth now?" I stared out the window at the quiet street. "Yes," I said softly. His voice dropped to a whisper. Millions, I closed my eyes and finally said the words that would change everything. Daniel, yes, that land is the land your buyer just parked the car on. Silence. Then Daniel whispered in pure panic, Dad, what do we do? The hidden inheritance. Daniel's breathing was still shaky on the phone. Dad, this isn't funny, he said. Tell me you're joking. I'm not joking, I replied calmly. For several seconds there was nothing but silence between us. Finally he spoke again. Millions, he whispered. You're telling me you owned land worth millions and never told me. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar ache in my chest, not the sharp pain of a failing heart, but the heavy weight of old memories. It wasn't worth millions when I got it, I said quietly. Daniel sounded impatient. Then how much? Almost nothing. 42 years earlier, I had been a very different man, young, broke, and stubborn enough to believe that someday things would change. Back then, I worked for a small logging company in a remote valley 2 hours outside the city. The place was called Redwood Valley, though most people had never heard of it. The forests there were thick with ancient trees and the land seemed endless, but the town itself was dying. Sawmills were closing, families were leaving. Land was cheap, sometimes unbelievably cheap. One rainy afternoon, an old farmer named Mr. Haverson walked into the logging office holding a stack of papers. He looked tired, like a man who had run out of time. I'm selling my land, he told the manager. No one cared. 200 acres of rocky hills and forest far from the highway, worthless according to everyone there. But for some reason I asked him a question. How much? The old man studied me carefully. $5,000, I laughed, because at that time I barely had 500. Still, something about the place stuck in my mind. The tall trees, the quiet river. The strange feeling that the land itself was waiting. It took me 3 years to save enough money, 3 years of overtime shifts, 3 years of cheap meals and long nights. But eventually I bought the land, 200 acres. Most people thought I was crazy. Why waste money on dirt? My coworkers asked, but I didn't see dirt, I saw time. Land doesn't disappear. Cities grow, roads expand, and sometimes the places nobody wants become the places everyone needs. Years later, after your mother got sick, life became complicated. Hospital bills piled up. Insurance barely helped. More than once I considered selling the land, but your mother always stopped me. I still remember one night clearly. She was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking through the old documents. You should keep it, she said. Why? I asked. Because someday, she replied with a gentle smile, it might save our son. Back in the present, Daniel finally spoke again. Wait, he said slowly. If the land was yours all this time, why hide the documents in the car? That part was your mother's idea. What? Before she died, she told me something important. I paused. She said money changes people. Daniel didn't say anything. And she was right, I continued. I saw it happen to friends, relatives, even neighbors. So you hid it? Daniel asked. Yes, but why the car? Because no one would ever look there. The old Buick had always been overlooked, rusty, unimpressive, just an old man's car, which made it the perfect hiding place. Daniel suddenly spoke with urgency. Dad, there's a problem. I assumed there was. The guy who bought the car, he opened the box. Yes, and now he knows about the land. I wasn't surprised. What's his name? I asked. Mark Jensen. What did he say? Daniel hesitated. He said the documents prove the land belongs to you. That's correct. But what? Daniel swallowed. He said since the documents were inside the car and he bought the car, the box might belong to him. I sighed. That's not how property law works. Try explaining that to him, Daniel replied nervously. He's already calling lawyers. My chest tightened again, not from fear, from disappointment. Because I could already see how this situation had happened. Daniel had rushed, sold something that wasn't his, and now someone else believed they had discovered a hidden fortune. Listen carefully, I told him. Okay, first, the land deed is registered in my name. Right. Second, ownership of a car does not transfer ownership of documents hidden inside it. Daniel exhaled slowly. So we're safe. I thought about the man who bought the car, the type of person who checks a trunk carefully enough to find a hidden box. Not necessarily, I said. What do you mean? People do strange things when they believe they've found millions of dollars. Daniel's voice dropped. You think he'll try to claim it? Yes, but he can't. Legally. Probably not. Then what's the problem? I stared out the window again because the problem wasn't the law, the problem was people, and greed. Just then another call came through. Daniel looked at the screen. It's him, he whispered. Answer it, I said. I listened as Daniel picked up. Hello, a deep voice responded on the other end. Mr. Carter, yes, this is Mark Jensen. I believe you sold me a car yesterday. Daniel swallowed. Yes, well, the man said calmly, I found something inside it that we need to discuss. Daniel glanced toward me. I gestured for him to put the call on speaker. He pressed the button. Mr. Jensen, I said. There was a brief pause. Ah, the man replied slowly. You must be the father, that's right. Well, Jensen continued, it appears your car came with a very interesting surprise. Yes, I said calmly. The documents inside that metal box claim ownership of 200 acres of land. That's correct. Another pause, then Jensen spoke again. I think we both understand what that means. I leaned forward slightly. Yes, I said, it means the car you bought yesterday was parked on land worth millions. The man chuckled softly. Yes, he said, and I believe we should talk about who that land really belongs to now. Daniel looked at me in horror, because something in Jensen's voice made one thing very clear. This man wasn't planning to give anything back. The man who found the box, the silence after Mark Jensen's last sentence felt heavy enough to crush the room. Daniel looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. I remained calm. Mr. Jensen, I said slowly, I believe there's a misunderstanding. Oh, Jensen replied, his voice smooth and confident. Is there? Yes, the documents you found belong to me. Another quiet chuckle came through the phone. That may be true, he said, but they were in my car. Daniel rubbed his forehead nervously. You bought the car yesterday, I said. Not the contents of a hidden lockbox. That depends, Jensen replied casually, on how a lawyer chooses to look at it. Daniel's breathing grew faster. Look, man, he said quickly, I sold you a car, not a treasure chest. Jensen ignored him. Instead, he addressed me directly. Mr. Carter, may I ask you something? Go ahead. Did you intentionally hide those documents in the trunk? Yes. For how long? About 25 years. Jensen whistled softly. Well, that's quite the secret. Daniel paced across the living room. Dad, this guy sounds serious, he whispered. I nodded slowly. Men like Jensen didn't panic when they found something valuable. They calculated, they planned, they waited, and that made them far more dangerous. Mr. Carter, Jensen continued on the phone. I did some research this morning. I'm sure you did. Your land in Redwood Valley sits directly next to the new highway development project. Yes, and according to county records, he said. A large technology company recently purchased the surrounding land. Daniel's eyes widened. How did he find that out so fast? He whispered. I wasn't surprised. The moment Jensen saw those documents, he likely began searching everything he could. Do you know what that means? Jensen asked. Yes, I said calmly. It means the land you forgot about is now in the center of a major expansion zone. Daniel suddenly grabbed a chair and sat down heavily. Dad, I raised a hand to calm him. Jensen continued. Developers are already offering millions per acre for nearby property. Daniel looked like he might faint. Millions per acre, he whispered. The room suddenly felt smaller. He had sold the car for $2,000. 2,000, Mr. Carter, Jensen said, his tone becoming more serious. I think we should meet. Why? To discuss the situation. There's nothing to discuss, I replied calmly. The land belongs to me. Jensen laughed softly. You're probably right, legally speaking. Daniel relaxed slightly, but Jensen wasn't finished. However, he continued, things can become very complicated. How so? Well, for starters, he said, the car is currently sitting on that land. Daniel looked confused. What? Jensen explained slowly. I drove the Buick up to Redwood Valley this morning. Daniel jumped to his feet. You what? I wanted to see the property myself, Jensen replied casually. My stomach tightened. Why? I asked. Curiosity. Daniel grabbed the phone. You had no right to do that. I had every right, Jensen replied calmly. I own the car, but you don't own the land, Jensen paused. Not yet. A cold silence filled the room, then Jensen continued speaking. You see, Mr. Carter, I've already spoken with a real estate lawyer. Of course he had, and he informed me of something very interesting. What's that? I asked. Property taxes. My heart skipped a beat. Daniel looked at me. Dad, you paid the taxes, right? I didn't answer immediately because the truth was complicated. Jensen spoke again. According to county records, the property taxes on that land haven't been paid in 18 years. Daniel's face went pale. Dad, I exhaled slowly. I thought they were automatically deducted from an old account. They weren't, Jensen said. And when property taxes remain unpaid for long enough, Daniel whispered the words before Jensen could finish. The county can auction the land. Exactly, Jensen said. Daniel stared at me in shock. Dad, tell me that didn't happen. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not yet, but it will soon, Jensen said calmly. In fact, the auction is scheduled for next month. Daniel's voice cracked. So someone could buy the land? Yes, Jensen replied, for the unpaid tax amount. Daniel grabbed his hair in panic. How much are we talking about? Jensen answered immediately. About $42,000. Daniel nearly collapsed into the chair again. 42,000 for land worth millions? Yes. Then Jensen delivered the final blow. And guess who plans to be the highest bidder? Daniel slowly whispered the name. You, correct. My son stared at me, panic filling his face. Dad, if he buys it, he'll own the land, I said quietly. Daniel looked like he might be sick. All because I sold the car, Jensen's voice returned to the phone. Mr. Carter, I'm a reasonable man. I already knew what was coming. A reasonable man, I repeated. Yes, what do you want? A partnership. Daniel looked confused. A partnership, he whispered. Jensen continued. You keep your name on the deed. In exchange for what? In exchange, Jensen said calmly, for half the land's value. Daniel exploded. Half? That's insane, but Jensen ignored him. Mr. Carter, he said quietly, you're recovering from heart surgery. I imagine dealing with lawyers and tax debt isn't ideal. I remained silent. So here's my offer, Jensen continued. You agree to a partnership, or I buy the land at auction next month. Daniel's hands were shaking. Dad, what do we do? I stared at the phone. Because in that moment I realized something important. Mark Jensen believed he had all the leverage, but he didn't know the full story, not yet. And when he did, everything would change. The claws he did see, Daniel was pacing across the living room like a trapped animal. Dad, we can't lose that land, he said nervously. If what he's saying is true, he could steal millions from us for $40,000. I stayed seated, my hands resting calmly on the arms of the chair. Mark Jensen was still on the phone, waiting. Men like him enjoyed silence. They believed silence meant fear. Finally, I spoke. Mr. Jensen. Yes, Mr. Carter, you seem very confident. I'm simply being realistic. You think the auction will solve everything. It usually does, he replied. Unpaid taxes lead to foreclosure. That's how the system works. Daniel whispered anxiously beside me. Dad, he's right. If the county auctions the land, anyone can buy it. I nodded slowly. Yes, anyone can. Jensen sounded pleased. Exactly. But there's something you missed, I added calmly. For the first time, Jensen hesitated. And what would that be? I leaned forward slightly. Did you read all the documents in that box? There was a pause. Yes, he said. Carefully? Of course. Daniel watched me closely. I could see confusion in his eyes. But Jensen had already made a mistake, because most people only read what they expect to find. Ownership papers, maps, land deeds, but hidden among those papers was something else. Something far more important. Mr. Jensen, I said, tell me something. Yes, did you notice the green folder? Another pause. Daniel whispered beside me. What green folder? Jensen finally answered. Yes, there was a green folder. Did you read it? Yes, then you must have seen the Heritage Protection Agreement. The line went completely silent. Daniel looked at me. What's that? But Jensen spoke first. What agreement? He asked slowly. Now I knew he hadn't read it properly, because if he had, he wouldn't be talking so confidently. I smiled faintly. The Redwood Heritage Preservation Contract, I said. The silence on the phone stretched longer. Daniel looked confused. Dad, what are you talking about? I took a slow breath. 40 years ago, I explained, the previous owner of that land made an agreement with the state. Why? To protect the old forest. Daniel blinked. The trees, yes. Jensen finally spoke again, but his voice sounded different now, more cautious. What exactly does that agreement say? I answered calmly. It states that the land cannot be sold, developed, or transferred to a private corporation. Daniel frowned. Wait, what? The forest on that land contains protected redwood trees. Jensen's breathing grew slightly heavier. And according to the contract, I continued, the land must remain in the care of the original family owner. Daniel's eyes widened. What does that mean? It means, I said quietly, only I can legally claim it. Jensen's voice turned sharp. That can't be right. It is. Then why would developers want the land? Because they think they can change the law. Another silence filled the call. Jensen was thinking now. Calculating again, but if the county auctions the land for unpaid taxes, he said carefully, that agreement won't matter. That's where you're wrong. Daniel leaned closer. Dad, the contract contains a special clause, I explained. What kind of clause? One that prevents exactly that situation. Jensen interrupted quickly. What clause? I answered slowly. If property taxes remain unpaid, the land cannot be sold to private buyers. Daniel looked stunned. Then who gets it? The state. Jensen suddenly spoke louder. That's impossible. It's written in the contract. Another long silence. Daniel whispered beside me. So if the county auctions the land, the state government has the first and only right to claim it, I finished. Daniel blinked. And they only have to pay the tax amount? Yes, he leaned back in shock. So the land would go to the state for $42,000, yes, even though it's worth millions. Yes, Daniel covered his face with his hands. That's insane, but I knew something else, something even more important, and Jensen had just realized it too, Mr. Carter, Jensen said slowly, if the state takes the land, what happens to you? According to the agreement, I replied. The original owner receives a heritage compensation payment. Daniel looked up. How much? I answered quietly. Market value. His mouth fell open. Market value, yes, so if the land is worth 10 million, then the state must pay that amount. Daniel stared at me in disbelief. On the phone, Jensen suddenly cursed under his breath. Because now he understood the situation. He couldn't buy the land, developers couldn't buy the land. The only person who could legally benefit from it was me. Jensen spoke again, but his confident tone was gone. You planned this. I shook my head. No, you hid those documents for a reason. I hid them to keep my family safe. Daniel looked ashamed. I continued speaking. And now you know something else, Mr. Jensen. What? You parked the Buick on protected land without permission. Another pause. Technically, I added calmly, that makes you a trespasser. Daniel's eyes widened. Oh wow, Jensen sounded angry now. You're bluffing? No, I could still challenge the contract in court. You could try. The line went quiet again. Then Jensen asked one final question. When did you plan to tell your son about all this? I looked at Daniel. His face was pale. I was planning to tell him next week, I said honestly. After my surgery recovery, Jensen let out a long breath. Well, he said bitterly, that timing is unfortunate. Daniel suddenly leaned toward the phone. What do you mean? Jensen answered coldly. Because I already called the county this morning. My heart skipped. And? I asked. Jensen replied quietly. I told them about the unpaid taxes and the documents proving ownership. Daniel's stomach dropped. Why would you do that? Jensen's voice became dark. Because if I can't have the land, I'm making sure no one else gets it easily either. Daniel whispered in panic. Dad, what does that mean? I looked out the window again. Because I suddenly realized something terrible. The county now knew the land was worth millions, which meant the quiet little tax auction next month was about to become a war. The auction that changed everything. The next 3 weeks passed like a storm gathering on the horizon. News spreads quickly when money is involved, especially when that money is measured in millions. What had once been a forgotten piece of forest in Redwood Valley suddenly became the center of attention for half the county. Developers began calling. Lawyers began sending letters. Real estate agents left messages daily. Even reporters tried contacting me, but I ignored them all. My focus was on something far more important, my health and my son. Daniel had changed since the phone call with Mark Jensen. The arrogant confidence he once carried had vanished. In its place was something new, regret, real regret. One evening, about a week before the auction, he sat quietly across from me in the kitchen. Dad, he said softly. Yes, I'm sorry. The words seemed heavy coming from him. I should never have sold your car. I nodded slowly. No, I agreed, you shouldn't have. He stared at the table. I was desperate. I had debts everywhere. Credit cards, personal loans, everything. I know, but that's not an excuse, he said quietly. For the first time in a long time, my son sounded honest, and that mattered more than money. Meanwhile, Mark Jensen was not giving up. He hired 2 different lawyers. He tried to challenge the preservation agreement. He even attempted to claim that the documents inside the trunk had legally transferred to him when he bought the car. Every argument failed. The contract protecting the land was airtight. And the state government had already stepped in. Because once the county realized what the land was worth, they moved quickly to secure it. Environmental agencies confirmed the forest was protected. Surveyors verified the boundaries, and the governor's office approved the heritage compensation clause. In simple terms, the law was clear. If the taxes remained unpaid, the state would take the land, and they would pay the rightful owner its full market value. Me, the morning of the auction finally arrived. The county courthouse was packed. Developers, lawyers, journalists, even curious locals who had heard rumors of a massive land deal. Daniel and I sat quietly in the back row. Across the room, I spotted Mark Jensen. He looked tired, angry, defeated, but he was still there, still hoping for some last-minute miracle. The county clerk stood at the front of the room. She adjusted her glasses and read from the official document. Property tax auction for parcel number 8842, Redwood Valley. Everyone in the room leaned forward. This property consists of 200 acres of protected forest land. A murmur spread through the crowd, then she continued. Due to the Redwood Heritage Preservation contract, private bidding is restricted. Several developers immediately began whispering in frustration. The State Environmental Trust has exercised its first right acquisition under Section 12 of the Preservation Agreement. In other words, the auction was already decided. The clerk continued. The state of California will acquire the property for the total unpaid tax amount. She glanced down at the paper. $42,316. The room erupted with noise, developers shouted in disbelief, reporters rushed out to make calls, and Mark Jensen simply stared at the floor. But the clerk wasn't finished. She read the final line. Under the Heritage Compensation Clause, the registered owner will receive fair market compensation. She looked up. Mr. Henry Carter. Daniel squeezed my arm. That's you, Dad. I slowly stood. The clerk smiled politely. Mr. Carter, the state appraisal office has completed their evaluation. The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped talking. The clerk continued. The market value of the property has been determined to be, she paused, $9,400,000. Daniel nearly fell out of his chair. Gasps filled the courtroom. Cameras flashed, and Mark Jensen closed his eyes. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he broke the silence. You're a millionaire now, I chuckled softly. I suppose so. He shook his head in disbelief. All because of a rusty old car, I smiled. No, he looked at me. All because of patience. A week later, the payment from the state was finalized. The money was deposited into my account, more money than I had ever imagined having in my lifetime. But the most important moment came that evening. Daniel came into the living room holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. After everything I did, after selling your car and nearly losing the land, he hesitated. Why didn't you cut me off? I looked at him carefully. Because the answer was simple, because you're still my son. His eyes filled with emotion. Then I reached into my pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. What's this? He asked. Open it, he did. Inside was a document, a bank transfer confirmation. Daniel stared at the number in shock. Dad, this says, yes, I transferred $3 million into your account. His hands began to shake. Why would you do that? I smiled gently. Because your mother was right. He looked confused. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair. She always believed the land would save you one day. Daniel's voice broke. But I almost ruined everything. Yes, I said calmly, but you didn't. He wiped his eyes. I won't waste this chance. I know. A month later, I drove out to Redwood Valley for the first time in years. The old forest was peaceful. Tall redwood trees stretched toward the sky. The wind moved quietly through the branches, and where my old Buick had once been parked, there was now a small sign placed by the state. It read, Redwood Heritage Preserve protected for future generations. I stood there for a long time, remembering the past, thinking about the future, and realizing something simple. Sometimes the greatest treasures in life aren't the ones you sell, they're the ones you protect.